Why are autistic people so anxious so much of the time? It's a really big and important question that we do need to consider in some detail. For a very, very long time, it was simply assumed, because anxiety was so common in autistic people, that anxiety was a kind of symptom, a natural trait of autism, that autistic people were naturally anxious. We now know a little bit better than that. We now realise that really it's more of a correlation. It's not really a correlation thing, it's more of a causation thing. Autistic people are anxious because of something, and not autism. Autistic people are anxious because of, well, everything. The way we experience the world. A great deal of autistic anxiety really boils down to the anxiety that you would feel living in a strange, weirdly hostile, oddly dangerous world. That is where so much autistic anxiety stems from. So I'm just going to walk you through some very common sources of the anxiety that we might feel. So I'm autistic myself, I'm also ADHD, and I do indeed suffer from a generalised anxiety disorder that I actually have medication for because it does affect my day-to-day. And the sources of anxiety that I tend to have are many and varied. Makes it sound good, doesn't it? But it's not. Much of my anxiety is social. I get a lot of anxiety in social situations when I'm dealing with people. Not necessarily in person. It can be when I'm dealing with people over email, over text messages or whatever. But I generally have a lot of anxiety around communicating with people most of all. And my biggest anxieties as an autistic person revolve around being misunderstood, being misinterpreted. I say something and the other person seems to me to hear something totally different. That happens an awful lot. Like an awful lot. And I pride myself in being a relatively clear communicator. Do you know what I mean? So, if this is happening to me, then what it must be like for other autistic people, I can't even imagine. But it happens. And it leads to anxiety because basically it creates this sort of situation where whenever I say anything to anybody, either verbally or if I post something on social media or if I write something in one of my books or if I say something on stage in a speech or something, I am then petrified that I somehow weirdly got something wrong that I didn't realise. And that's what so much of this is based around, actually. That fear that you've done something wrong without realising it. There's one thing about knowing you've done the wrong thing and knowing it, and just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. If you know you were speeding and the camera got you, then you've done wrong and you've just got to wait for the letter to come through. You just have to kind of make your peace with that. It's a whole other thing, though, when you can get told off or attacked or criticised for something you didn't know you did wrong. When it just comes out of nowhere. And you discover that actually that thing you said or that thing you did is totally wrong and you shouldn't do that. You can't say that. And that is the experience for a lot of autistic people. We say things, we make jokes, we make comments, we say hello in a certain way, we make small talk or try to, and we find out we've done it wrong and then we get criticised or told off or punished even for it. That leads to anxiety. That's a very anxiety-inducing way to have to live. You're always sort of just waiting for that to happen, to get the heads up that, yeah, you've done something wrong. You said the wrong thing there. It's very stressful. Another source of anxiety is sensory in nature. Right now, I'm fine. I'm in my known space. This is my office in the attic. And you might be thinking, well, you're autistic. How come you've got twinkly lights and so much kind of clutter everywhere? Well, first of all, I'm not hugely sensitive to light. That isn't my main sensitivity. Sound is far more of a problem for me, as is temperature. So I actually quite like the fairy lights. They make me feel festive and quite pleasant. And as for Lego, well, I like to be surrounded by that at all times. This is my safe space. I have this room set up perfectly to my needs, my sensory needs. Same with, obviously, downstairs, the rest of my house. Same with other places too, my car, for example. My favourite coffee shop. Now, with my favourite coffee shop, I haven't had the power to make that the way I like it. It just happens to be the way I like it. That's why it's my favourite coffee shop and why I go there every day. But what about other places? The doctors, a different coffee shop, the supermarket, a train station, an airport, a school visit when I go to give a talk or a speech. That's when the anxiety steps in, because you don't know what you're going to be dealing with. Am I going to be too hot? And if I am going to be too hot, will there be anything I can do about it? Will I be able to open a window? Will I be able to put the air conditioning on? Will there be air conditioning? If I get too hot, what will happen? Will I start to sweat like I tend to? Too much information, but I'm autistic. Get used to that. Will I look flustered? Will I lose my ability to communicate? Will my speech, if I'm doing a speech, or my training, if I'm delivering training, suffer as a result? I don't know. Oh God, what shall I do? I don't know what to do. I can't dress appropriately because in my case that would mean turning up in like a vest and shorts and it's the middle of winter because I get really oversensitive to heat. So it just, this snowball of anxiety starts to smash through everything, and it's a lot. You know, it's why I like to stay at home. And when I book hotels, because I do travel a lot, I always stay in the same chain of hotels, not just because I get the points and all the rest of it, but because I know what I'm getting. I know that that hotel chain tends to have openable windows, tends to have air conditioning as well, the beds are comfortable, etc., etc. So I know on a sensory level, it's a bit like my coffee shop. I'm safe there. But when you're out in the world, and I mean, this is particularly key for kids at school or people who start a new job, you just don't know what you're going to be dealing with. And that can create an extraordinary amount of anxiety. Another source of anxiety for autistic people is having to deal with transitions, task transitions, or having to move from one thing to another. Autistic people are monotropic. We like to focus on one thing at a time in great detail. And we like to keep our transitions to a minimum. So, for example, in any given day, I'll try and do as few things as I can get away with. Not through laziness, but through minimizing how many times I will have to switch from one thing to another, We have to do that very carefully. We have to manage our energy levels to be able to deal with that. But if you're in a position at work or at school where you have no power over those transitions, where they will be imposed upon you whenever the teacher or your boss or whoever wants to, then anxiety can rocket. Stress rockets too, because you're just waiting for the next transition and you know you won't be able to deal with it. Every extra transition that you have to force your brain to go through increases the likelihood of melting down. And I guess there's another source of anxiety. Is all of this going to get so much that I hit my limit of what I can deal with and go into what we call autistic meltdown? It's not a tantrum, it's a response to hitting your ceiling of tolerance. When that happens, all bets are off. Things can get very, very difficult very fast. Losing control, shouting, screaming, self-harm. You don't be doing that in public. You know, it's bad enough at home on your own. In public, oh my word. What is a terrifying thought. Adding to anxiety. And then finally, above all of this, I suppose linking all of these things together is a very hard to escape feeling that all of these things that I'm dealing with and that I'm trying to manage to keep my anxiety down, the rest of the world simply doesn't understand. So if I let some of it slip, if I show some of that anxiety for the reasons that I have it, people won't get it. People won't understand. They'll just ignore me, or they'll tell me that I'm making it up, or they'll tell me that I'm making a big fuss out of nothing, or they'll tell me that I'm having a tantrum and to stop it. When you know that you can't necessarily depend on the people around you, whether it's friends, family, teachers, colleagues, that kind of raises the anxiety across the board, because you know that nobody has necessarily got your back. Now, I'm not saying that, there are autistic people out there who have allies who do have their backs, which is great. It's a wonderful thing. But I wouldn't say it's common. I think a lot of autistic people feel very alone, very isolated in all of this. So having to navigate and negotiate our way through all of this anxiety that we're experiencing without anyone who's necessarily on our side can just make it all so much more difficult. So there we are. There are other reasons. There are other sources of anxiety, plenty of them. I'll probably do another video on them at some point, but I've put these off for too long, so just bear with. But there we are. There's some sources of anxiety for autistic people. Hopefully useful for autistic people themselves, but maybe even more useful for the people around autistic people who need to better understand how we go through our lives.